Lord, open our eyes to see you, our ears to hear you, and our hearts to receive you. Amen. So our gospel this week begins with Jesus calling Matthew, a tax collector, to drop what he is doing and follow Jesus. Matthew, a tax collector, someone considered by other Jews to be a collaborator with the Roman government, someone who is not invited to any respectable community gathering, certainly not to your home for dinner, yet that is what Jesus did. The tax collectors collected taxes for the government and then put their commission on top of that. There was no oversight of what they collected for themselves as long as the Roman government got its taxes. So tax collectors were not only socially marginalized, they were considered morally corrupt as well. And this was the company that Jesus was eating with after he called Matthew to follow him. No wonder the Pharisees were upset with him. Matthew, like the other disciples that Jesus called, did drop what he was doing. He quit his way of life to follow Jesus, to be a blessing to others. Matthew was able to change his life and his companions to follow Jesus. Only in Matthew's gospel does Jesus reply to the Pharisees when they complain that he is eating with tax collectors and sinners that, "Go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice, for I have come to call not the righteous, but sinners." I desire mercy, not sacrifice. Jesus is quoting Hosea, who told Israel that God desired steadfast love and not sacrifice, the knowledge of God rather than burnt offerings. Matthew's gospel is all about being merciful and compassionate in the treatment of all people. That the followers of Jesus are to be compassionate and respect the dignity of every human being. When I was discerning whether I was called to follow Jesus, to minister with all of you, I read your core values. And one really struck me. It says, "We desire to be authentic people, not putting on airs or pretenses to cover up the truth of who we are. In striving to become a safe environment for all people, we value compassion. We want to welcome everyone, those who are celebrating and full of gladness, and those who are hurting and given to despair. We also desire to care for all in our community, especially those who are aging, infirmed, marginalized, or oppressed. To be compassionate means that we uphold our baptismal vows to respect the dignity of every human being and to seek and serve Christ and all people. To be compassionate means to respect the dignity of every human being. And that is what our gospel's message is all about this morning. Jesus is showing us how to be merciful and compassionate, to respect the dignity of every human being. And while Jesus is speaking to the Pharisees about God desiring mercy, a man kneels at his feet, asking Jesus to come and resurrect his daughter. This is the leader of the local synagogue, one of the people who should have been criticizing Jesus. Instead, his faith in Jesus and his belief in God's mercy are so great that he comes to Jesus asking him to restore his daughter's life. So Jesus leaves the dinner to go with him. And on his way, a woman who has been hemorrhaging for 12 years reaches out to touch the fringe of Jesus' cloak. She has been ostracized from her community for 12 years because she is impure. She would have had to leave her home and live on the outskirts of the town so that no man could be contaminated by her. She, like Matthew, was seen as an outcast of society. And she touches Jesus, something that a man would be horrified about. And Jesus calls her daughter. He praises her for her risk of faith to reach out to him for healing. He restores her to her community and family. He has shown her mercy and compassion. Jesus then continues to the synagogue leader's home, takes the child's hand and raises her to new life. Her father's risk of faith brought healing and new life to his daughter. She has been restored to her community and her family, just as the woman and Matthew found new life through their faith in Jesus. In Luke's version of the raising of the daughter, Jesus tells them to give her something to eat. Matthew ate dinner with Jesus. The daughter ate with Jesus. I imagine the woman who was healed also went home and had a meal with her family. The first thing that Jesus did when he was calling Peter was to go to his house where he healed Peter's mother-in-law, and then she prepared a meal for them. Jesus was always eating with people, enjoying fellowship around the table. Whom we share a meal with says something about who we include in our social network and families. Another of your core values is at the heart of our identity as Episcopalians is the celebration of Holy Communion. It reminds us that we come together not based on intellectual uniformity or shared interest, but first and foremost because of the radical hospitality of Christ, who calls us to gather around a common table. We share in communion, no matter how we may be different or disagree with one another. The radical hospitality of Christ, who calls us to gather around a common table. When I was asked to build a community for campus ministry programs, first at Christopher Newport University and then at Old Dominion University, the first thing I did was invite students to lunch. I didn't ask them to come to church. I told them they could come and hang out with my therapy dog and have something to eat. As students came and began to form a community around the shared meal, then we began to talk about faith and where God was active in their lives. And some of those students had never been in a church before, and most of them had actually been in a church and had left. Some felt ostracized by the Christianity that they had encountered because of their sexuality. But at Canterbury, all were included around the table. The students cared for each other and supported each other. They reached out to other students on campus, telling them that Canterbury was a safe and welcoming space. We eventually had Eucharist and dinner together, and that was on Sunday evenings. But first, the students had to experience the radical hospitality of Christ, who called them to gather around a common table for a meal. To gather around a table where mercy and compassion were shown to those who felt ostracized in their society. There's an invitation that I use for communion that unfortunately I don't remember the source, but it was always the guest. In the homes of Peter and Jairus, Martha and Mary, Joanna and Susanna, he was always the guest. At the meal tables of the wealthy, where he pled the case of the poor, he was always the guest. Upsetting polite company, befriending isolated people, welcoming the stranger, he was always the guest. But here at this table, he is the host. Those who wish to serve him must first be served by him. Those who want to follow him must first be fed by him. For this is the table where God intends us to be nourished. This is the time when Christ can make us new. So come, you who hunger and thirst for a deeper faith, for a better life, for a more just world. Jesus Christ, who has sat at our tables, now invites us to be guests at his. As I begin my ministry among you, I pray that you will live into your core values, being a blessing to each other and to our community through being merciful, compassionate, and extending the radical hospitality of Christ to all people. Amen.